The rejection wound still bled through Arya's white ceremonial dress, a crimson stain spreading across her chest, where the mate bond had been severed. She stood on the raised platform in the center of the Ironwood Pack's trading hall, her wrists bound with silver-threaded rope that burned her skin with every trembling breath. Around her, pack members whispered and pointed. Some laughed. Others looked away in shame. An Omega rejected on her mating ceremony, Alpha Marcus announced from his throne, his voice carrying the cruel satisfaction of a predator who'd cornered wounded prey. According to pack law, an unclaimed Omega forfeits her protection. She becomes property to be sold to the highest bidder. Arya's legs nearly buckled. 3 hours ago, she'd stood in the sacred moon grove wearing this same dress, waiting for Damien, her fated mate, the pack's beta, to complete their bonding ritual. Instead, he'd looked at her with cold disgust and spoken the words that shattered her world. "I reject you, Arya Ashwood. Your bloodline is weak, your wolf too small. I will not bind myself to mediocrity." The bond had snapped like a physical wound, tearing through her chest and leaving her gasping on the forest floor, while the gathered witnesses watched in silence. No one had helped her stand. No one had defended her. Now she was bleeding, broken, and about to be sold like livestock. "We'll start the bidding at 500 silver marks," Marcus declared, his eyes gleaming with malice. He'd always despised her family, and this public humiliation was his revenge for her father's past defiance. 500, called a grizzled warrior from the back, his leer making Arya's stomach turn. 700, countered a merchant known for his cruelty to servants. 1,000, growled a massive enforcer whose reputation for violence preceded him. Arya closed her eyes, willing herself to disappear. The silver rope burned hotter as her fear spiked, her wolf too traumatized from the rejection to even surface. She was utterly defenseless. The bidding climbed higher. 1,500, 2,000. Each number felt like another nail in her coffin, each voice promising a future worse than death. Then the doors to the trading hall exploded open. The temperature in the room dropped instantly. Every wolf present felt the crushing weight of ancient power rolling through the space like an avalanche. Arya's eyes snapped open as silence fell so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. A figure stood in the doorway, backlit by moonlight streaming through the entrance. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black that seemed to absorb the light around him. But it was his presence that stole the air from the room, an alpha power so overwhelming that every wolf instinctively lowered their gaze. Every wolf except Arya, who was too shocked to look away. 300,000 silver marks, the stranger said, his voice low and commanding, carrying effortlessly through the hall, and the immediate dissolution of this pack's charter for violating the Continental Accord. Alpha Marcus shot to his feet, his face draining of color. "Your Majesty, we weren't informed." Silence. The single word cracked like a whip. The stranger moved forward, and Arya finally understood what she was seeing. This wasn't just any alpha. The silver crown mark on his neck. The ancient authority radiating from every step. The way seasoned warriors trembled as he passed. This was Theron Blackthorn, the Alpha King of the Western Territories, ruler of 47 packs, and enforcer of werewolf law across the entire continent. And he was walking straight toward her. Theron stopped at the base of the platform, his dark eyes finally meeting hers. Arya had heard stories about the Alpha King, how he'd lost his fated mate in a pack war 10 years ago, how he'd executed the entire bloodline responsible, how he'd ruled with iron justice ever since, never taking another mate, never showing mercy to those who violated pack law. She'd also heard he never intervened in pack politics, yet here he stood. "Release her," Theron commanded, his gaze never leaving Arya's face. The enforcer holding the rope's end moved instantly, his hands shaking as he unwound the silver bindings. The moment they fell away, Arya's knees gave out. She pitched forward, certain she'd hit the platform's wooden surface. Instead, strong arms caught her. Theron had moved with supernatural speed, appearing beside her before gravity could claim her. He lifted her effortlessly, cradling her against his chest as though she weighed nothing. The rejection wound still bled through her dress, staining his black jacket, but he didn't seem to notice or care. The auction is over, Theron announced to the frozen hall. This Omega is under my protection. Any pack member who participated in this travesty has 48 hours to appeal to the Continental Council. If no valid justification is provided, Ironwood Pack will be absorbed into the Blackthorn territory, and your Alpha will face trial for violating the Omega Protection Clause. Marcus collapsed back into his throne, his authority crumbling like sand. Theron turned toward the door, still holding Arya. She should have been terrified, kidnapped by the most powerful wolf on the continent, claimed by a king who'd destroyed entire packs for lesser offenses. But as she pressed against his chest, feeling his steady heartbeat beneath her cheek, smelling cedar and winter storms and something ancient and safe, all she felt was a strange, unexpected peace. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Theron's arms tightened fractionally around her. "Because no one should bleed alone on an auction block," he said quietly, for her ears only, "and because I remember what it feels like to lose everything." Then he carried her out of the hall into the moonlight, away from the pack that had destroyed her, toward a future she couldn't yet imagine. Behind them, the Ironwood Pack watched in stunned silence as their world began to crumble, the price of their cruelty finally coming due. Chapter 2. The Royal Sanctuary. The journey to Blackthorn Palace passed in a blur. Arya drifted in and out of consciousness, cradled against Theron's chest as his personal guard formed a protective circle around them. Every bump in the road sent fresh pain through her rejection wound, and twice she felt the Alpha King's hand press against her back, a strange warmth flowing from his palm that dulled the worst of the agony. She woke fully as they passed through massive iron gates, the metalwork forged in the shape of thorned vines and crowned wolves. Blackthorn Palace rose before them, a fortress of black stone and silver towers that seemed to grow from the mountain itself, both beautiful and forbidding under the full moon's gaze. "Take her to the healing wing," Theron commanded as they entered a courtyard lit by hundreds of lanterns. "Send for healer Marianne immediately." Arya felt herself being transferred to gentler hands, a female beta with kind eyes who murmured soothing words as she carried Arya through corridors that smelled of old magic and authority. The palace was unlike anything she'd ever seen, its walls covered in tapestries depicting ancient battles and moon ceremonies, its floors polished stone that reflected candlelight like captured stars. The healing wing was quieter, filled with the scent of medicinal herbs and silver-infused water used to treat serious wolf injuries. Arya was placed on a bed softer than any she'd ever known, its pillows stuffed with down and lavender. An elderly woman with silver-streaked hair appeared moments later, her healer's robes marked with the crescent moon symbol of the Continental Medical Guild. "Let me see," she said gently, helping Arya sit up enough to examine the rejection wound. Healer Marianne's expression tightened as she studied the injury. "This was a particularly vicious severance," she murmured. "Your former mate intentionally made it as painful as possible. The wound will scar, but you'll survive." "Will my wolf recover?" Arya asked, her voice hollow. She could barely feel her wolf's presence anymore, just an empty ache where the connection should have been. "In time. Rejection trauma affects every Omega differently. Your wolf is protecting you by retreating deep within your consciousness. She'll emerge when she feels safe again." Marianne began applying a silver-based salve that immediately cooled the burning pain. "You're fortunate the Alpha King intervened when he did. Another hour on that auction block, and the psychological damage would have been permanent." Arya closed her eyes as the healer worked, questions swirling through her mind. Why had Theron Blackthorn, a king who commanded territories spanning thousands of miles, personally rescued an unknown Omega from a minor pack? The amount he'd bid was more than most packs generated in a decade. It made no sense. "Rest now," Marianne instructed after bandaging the wound. "The Alpha King has ordered that you're not to be disturbed. Guards are posted outside your door for your protection, not imprisonment. You're free to move about the healing wing when you're strong enough." As the healer left, Arya stared at the vaulted ceiling above her bed, painted with constellations that seemed to move in the candlelight. She'd gone from being publicly humiliated and sold to being a guest in the most powerful pack in the Western Territories. Her mind couldn't reconcile the shift. Sleep claimed her before she could make sense of any of it. She woke to voices outside her door, low, tense, male. "She's not ready to see anyone yet, Your Majesty. The wound is still fresh and her wolf remains dormant. I'm not here to interrogate her, Marianne. I need to ensure she's comfortable." Arya recognized Theron's voice immediately, that deep, commanding tone that made even his quiet words sound like declarations. She sat up carefully, wincing as the movement pulled at her bandaged chest. "Come in," she called before she could second-guess herself. The door opened and the Alpha King entered alone. He'd changed from his blood-stained jacket into simpler clothes, dark trousers and a charcoal shirt that somehow made him look more imposing rather than less. Up close, without the chaos of the auction hall, Arya could truly see him. Theron Blackthorne was devastatingly handsome, in a way that had nothing to do with conventional attractiveness, and everything to do with raw power barely contained. His features were sharp, carved from stone and shadow, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, dark eyes that seemed to hold centuries of authority. But it was the grief she glimpsed beneath that authority that made him seem almost human. "How are you feeling?" he asked, staying near the door as though afraid approaching would frighten her. "Confused," Arya answered honestly. "Your Majesty, I don't understand why you—" "Theron," he interrupted. "No titles here. You've been through enough formality." She blinked. "Theron," she repeated carefully, testing the name on her tongue. "Why did you save me? The amount you paid, the threat to the entire pack. It was more than any Omega is worth, especially one who's been rejected." Something dark flashed across his face. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't ever diminish your worth based on what that fool did to you. Damien's rejection says everything about his inadequacy and nothing about yours." Arya stared at him. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such certainty, such conviction that she mattered. Theron moved closer, finally, settling into a chair beside her bed, with the controlled grace of a predator, choosing to appear less threatening. "I intervened because what Ironwood Pact did violated the Continental Accord, the laws that govern all packs under my jurisdiction. Omegas are to be protected, not sold. That alone justified my actions." "That's the official reason," Arya said softly. "What's the real one?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then, 10 years ago, I lost my fated mate. Catherine was an Omega from a smaller pack, gentle and kind. Everything I wasn't. I was young then, newly crowned, too focused on consolidating power to protect what mattered most. When a rival pack attacked, targeting her specifically to weaken me, he paused, his jaw tightening. I found her too late. She died before I could get her to healers. Arya's breath caught. "I'm sorry. I swore that night that I would never again let an Omega suffer while I had the power to prevent it. I've enforced that oath for a decade. When I received word that Ironwood was planning to auction a rejected Omega, something that hasn't happened in the Western Territories in 50 years, I came immediately." "To make an example of them," Arya said, understanding dawning. "To make an example, to enforce the law, and—" Theron met her gaze fully. "To offer you something I couldn't offer Catherine. Peace, safety, a choice about your own future." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. "You paid 300,000 marks to give me peace?" Arya asked, her voice breaking slightly. "I'd have paid 3 million. Theron's expression softened in a way that made him look younger, less like a fearsome king, and more like a man carrying unbearable grief. "You deserve to heal without fear. To decide what comes next without anyone forcing your hand. That's all I'm offering sanctuary, for as long as you need it." Arya felt tears sliding down her cheeks before she realized she was crying. Not from pain or fear, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen as something more than worthless, broken, disposable. "Thank you," she whispered. Theron stood, preparing to leave. "Rest, heal. When you're ready, we'll discuss your options. Staying here, relocating to another pack, establishing yourself as an independent wolf. Whatever you choose, you'll have my support and resources." As he reached the door, Arya called out, "Theron?" He turned back. "Do you still miss her? Your mate?" His answer was quiet but absolute. "Every single day." Then he was gone, leaving Arya alone with her thoughts and the strange, unexpected warmth blooming in her chest. Not a mate bond, but something equally precious. Hope. Chapter 3. The Healing Court. The weeks that followed developed a rhythm Arya had never known existed. She healed slowly, both physically and emotionally, under Marianne's expert care and the watchful protection of Blackthorn Palace's residents. The palace itself was a revelation. Unlike Ironwood's rigid hierarchy where Omegas were barely tolerated, Blackthorn functioned as a true pack, Alphas, Betas, and Omegas working together with mutual respect. Arya watched, amazed, as Omega advisors attended council meetings, as female warriors trained alongside males, as the lowest-ranked wolves were greeted with the same courtesy as the highest. This was Theron's legacy, she learned. After Catherine's death, he'd completely restructured werewolf society within his territories, elevating Omega rights and crushing any pack that maintained the old, brutal traditions. Arya began venturing beyond the healing wing after her wound scarred over, a silver mark across her chest that she'd carry forever, a reminder of Damien's cruelty and her own survival. She explored the palace gardens where night-blooming flowers filled the air with jasmine and moonflower scent. She discovered the library, a massive room filled with thousands of texts about pack history and lore. And she saw Theron, not often and never by design. He was careful to give her space, to avoid any appearance of expectation or pressure. But sometimes their paths crossed, in the garden at dawn when she couldn't sleep, in the library late at night when he reviewed petitions, in the hallway when he returned from territorial inspections. Each encounter was brief, respectful, and utterly devastating to Arya's carefully maintained emotional distance. Because Theron Blackthorn, she was discovering, was nothing like the fearsome tyrant rumors painted him to be. He was just, yes, and merciless to those who harmed innocents, but he was also unexpectedly gentle, carrying a bone-deep loneliness that resonated with her own. One evening, 3 weeks after her arrival, Arya found him standing alone on the palace's highest balcony, staring at the full moon with an expression of such profound sadness that she almost retreated. Instead, she stepped forward. "Do you come here often?" she asked softly. Theron didn't startle. He'd clearly scented her approach. Every full moon. Catherine loved watching the moon rise from this spot. She said it made her feel connected to something larger than pack politics and territorial disputes. Arya moved to stand beside him, careful to maintain respectful distance. What was she like? Brave. Much braver than anyone gave her credit for. She challenged me constantly, refused to let me hide behind authority when I was wrong. A sad smile touched his lips. She would have liked you. You have her courage, surviving that rejection, facing everything that came after. Lesser wolves would have broken. I almost did break, Arya admitted. On that auction block, I wanted to disappear, if you hadn't arrived when you did. But I did. Theron finally turned to look at her. And you're still here, still fighting, that's what matters. They stood in comfortable silence, watching moonlight paint the valley below in silver. Arya felt her wolf stir for the first time since the rejection, not fully awakening, but aware, curious about the powerful alpha standing beside them. "I've been thinking about what comes next," Arya said eventually. "You offered me choices. I think I'm finally ready to hear them." Theron nodded. "You can stay here as long as you wish. Permanent residence if you prefer. I have several Omegas who serve as advisors and administrators, or I can arrange relocation to any pack within my territories that meets my standards for Omega treatment. Or I can provide resources for you to establish yourself independently, outside the traditional pack structure entirely." "What would you choose?" Arya asked. "If you were in my position." He considered the question seriously. "I'd stay, but I'm biased. I've never trusted easily, and recovering in a place where you feel safe seems more important than independence for its own sake. However, my circumstances aren't yours." "Why are you biased?" The question emerged before Arya could stop it, more personal than she'd intended. Theron's gaze held hers. "Because having you here has reminded me that life exists beyond duty and grief. Your presence has brought something back to this palace that died with Catherine. Hope, laughter in the gardens, a reason to ensure the guest wings are comfortable rather than merely functional." He paused. Selfish reasons, perhaps, but honest ones. Arya's heart stuttered. This wasn't a romantic declaration. Theron was too honorable, too aware of the power imbalance between them to make any such claim. But it was an admission that she mattered to him beyond legal obligation or political maneuvering. "I'd like to stay," she said quietly. "At least for a while longer, if that's acceptable." More than acceptable. Relief flickered across Theron's expression. "Whatever you need, training, education, purpose, it's yours." "I want to help others," Arya found herself saying. "Omegas who've been rejected or abused. There must be more like me, wolves who need sanctuary and don't know where to find it." Theron's eyes lit with something that might have been pride. "There are. I've established safe houses throughout my territories, but they need oversight. Someone who understands what those Omegas are experiencing." He studied her face. "Are you offering to take that on? If you'll trust me with it, I'd trust you with far more than that." The words were quiet, but absolute. They talked long into the night, planning a network of support that would reach every corner of the Western Territories. Arya felt her wolf finally, fully awaken, not healed from the rejection, perhaps never fully healed, but ready to live again, ready to find purpose in her pain. And as she worked beside Theron, their heads bent over maps and proposals, she realized something that should have terrified her, but instead felt like coming home. She was beginning to care for the Alpha King, not as a savior or protector, but as a man she genuinely admired and respected, a man who, despite his grief and power, saw her as an equal worth listening to. Chapter 4. The Bond Reforged. 3 months after the auction, Arya stood in the palace's council chamber presenting her proposal to expand the Omega Sanctuary network. 15 Alpha representatives from across the Western Territories listened as she outlined resource requirements, staffing needs, and legal protections. This was her life now, advocating for vulnerable wolves, building systems that would prevent others from suffering as she had. Theron had given her not just safety, but purpose, authority backed by his own considerable power. The vote was unanimous. Every Alpha present pledged resources to support the sanctuaries. As the meeting concluded, Marcus of Ironwood, stripped of his Alpha title and reduced to a regional representative after his pack's absorption, approached her. "Arya," he said, his voice humble in a way it had never been before. "I owe you an apology. What we did was inexcusable." Arya met his gaze steadily. "You owe me nothing. You owe every Omega in your former pack an apology, and years of better behavior to prove you've changed." Marcus nodded and retreated. Arya felt no satisfaction in his diminishment, only gratitude that other wolves wouldn't suffer under his leadership. Theron found her afterward in the garden, their unofficial meeting place. "You were magnificent in there," he said. "The way you commanded their attention made them see the necessity. Catherine would have been proud." "So would my father," Arya replied. "He always said strength wasn't about domination, but about lifting others up. I finally understand what he meant." They walked together through paths lined with night-blooming flowers, falling into the comfortable companionship they'd developed over months of working side by side. But tonight felt different, charged with something unspoken. "Arya," Theron said eventually, stopping beside a fountain carved with moon symbols. "I need to tell you something." Her heart kicked against her ribs. "I'm listening." "These past months, having you here, working with you, watching you transform pain into purpose, it's awakened feelings I thought died with Catherine." He turned to face her fully. "I'm not asking for anything. You're under no obligation to reciprocate. But I need you to know that you've become essential to me in ways that transcend protection or political alliance." Arya's breath caught. "Theron, I'm not your fated mate," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "That bond was stolen from you, and I would never presume to replace it. But chosen bonds, bonds built on respect, shared purpose, genuine affection, those can be just as powerful. Perhaps more so, because they're freely given rather than destiny's mandate." "Are you asking me to consider a chosen bond?" Arya asked, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm asking if you'd be willing to explore the possibility, slowly, without expectation. If the answer is no, nothing changes. You still have your position, your purpose, your home here. Arya stared at him. This powerful alpha king who'd saved her, empowered her, and somehow along the way captured her heart not through dominance but through compassion. What about Catherine? You said you miss her every day. I do. I always will. Theron's expression was raw, honest. But I've learned that honoring her memory doesn't mean refusing to live. She'd be furious with me for spending a decade alone when I could have been building something new, and you— He reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat, and gently cupped her face. You've shown me it's possible to carry grief and hope simultaneously. Arya leaned into his touch, her own hand rising to cover his. I've been afraid to feel anything. After Damien's rejection, I convinced myself I was too broken for romantic connection. You're not broken, scarred, yes, wounded, but you've alchemized that suffering into strength. Theron's thumb brushed her cheek. If you're willing, I'd like to earn your trust, your affection, your eventual love, not as a king claiming an omega, but as a man who's found someone worth emerging from grief for. Tears slid down Arya's face, not from pain this time, but from overwhelming emotion. I'm willing, more than willing. You've already earned my trust, Theron, and my affection. I've been fighting my feelings for weeks, thinking they were gratitude or misplaced attachment. And now I understand they're real. You see me, not as damaged goods or a charity case, but as someone capable and worthy. That's more precious than any fated mate bond. Theron pulled her closer, their foreheads touching. May I kiss you? Yes. The kiss was gentle, reverent. Nothing like the desperate claiming kisses of fated mates, driven by biological imperative. This was choice, intention, two wounded souls choosing connection despite their scars. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Arya's wolf sang with joy for the first time since the rejection. Not the frantic, overwhelming pull of a mate bond, but something quieter and more sustainable, genuine happiness. We'll take this slowly, Theron promised. Court properly. Give your wolf time to fully trust again. There's no rush. Slowly sounds perfect, Arya agreed. They walked back to the palace hand in hand, the full moon watching over them like a blessing. Behind them, in Ironwood territory, Damien received word of Arya's new position and the Alpha King's obvious favor. His regret came far too late to matter. In the palace gardens, Arya finally felt the last pieces of her shattered heart begin to knit back together, not erasing the rejection scar, but integrating it into a stronger, wiser version of herself. 6 months later, during the winter solstice ceremony, Theron and Arya completed their chosen bond ritual before the assembled packs. It wasn't fated destiny, but deliberate choice, witnessed, celebrated, and infinitely more meaningful because they'd each chosen it freely. And in the years that followed, as Arya's sanctuary network saved countless omegas, and Theron's territories became a model for progressive pack structure, they proved that sometimes the bonds we choose forge stronger than the ones destiny assigns. Their story became legend, not of a king claiming a broken omega, but of two scarred souls finding unexpected peace in each other's company and building something beautiful from the ruins of their past suffering. The auction block where Arya had nearly been sold was torn down and replaced with a monument, two wolves standing together beneath the moon, neither dominant nor submissive, but equal. A reminder that true strength lies not in power over others, but in lifting them to stand beside you. And every rejected, abandoned, and broken omega who found sanctuary in Blackthorn territory knew that peace was possible, that suffering could be transformed into purpose, and that the cruelest beginnings sometimes led to the most beautiful endings.